He hadn't broken a single law. No speeding, no swerving. Just a clean-cut black man behind the wheel of a luxury car. But the flashing lights came anyway. The officer's tone was sharp, his gaze cold. And as he demanded ID and barked questions, he never once looked at the passenger, until a low voice calmly said, "I'd like to speak to your superior." The cop turned and froze, his face drained of color.
If you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss a moment that matters.
What happened next flipped the entire narrative, because the person riding shotgun was someone who could end his career in a single sentence. Darius Cole had worked hard his whole life. At 34, he was a successful marketing executive living in Atlanta. Sharp suits, fast cars, and a reputation for delivering results. It was a life he'd earned through long nights and relentless ambition. But no matter how polished he looked or how high he climbed, some people only saw one thing: the color of his skin. That Saturday afternoon, Darius was driving his brand new silver Mercedes down a quiet suburban road. The leather seat still smelled new, the ride was smooth, and beside him sat someone he deeply respected, his mentor, retired federal judge Maxine Rowe. She had invited him to speak at a youth leadership conference that evening, and they were heading to the venue together. The windows were down, the air was warm, and they were discussing life, ambition, and legacy when Darius noticed it. A patrol car slowly merging behind him. No sirens, just steady tailing. At first, he dismissed it. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't doing anything wrong. But then the lights flashed. Darius pulled over calmly, glancing at Judge Rowe. She gave a small nod, serene and unbothered. But Darius felt that old, familiar tightness in his chest. He rolled down the window, both hands on the steering wheel, just like his father had taught him. The officer approached slowly, sunglasses hiding his eyes. He didn't greet them. He didn't ask if they were okay. He only said, "Whose car is this?" Darius kept his voice calm. "It's mine, officer. Is there a problem?" The cop didn't respond. He glanced into the car, eyes resting briefly on Judge Rowe before returning to Darius. "License and registration. Now." Darius nodded and reached slowly toward the glove compartment. "My registration is inside, just letting you know before I move." The officer's hand drifted to his holster. Judge Rowe spoke for the first time. "Officer, I'm Judge Maxine Rowe. This young man is." "I didn't ask you," the cop snapped, cutting her off without even looking in her direction. Darius handed over his documents, keeping his movements measured, deliberate. The officer took them, glanced at the license, then walked back to his cruiser. Minutes passed. The sun beat down. Darius clenched the steering wheel as Judge Rowe quietly fumed beside him. Then, footsteps. But this time, the officer didn't walk back to the driver's window. He came to the passenger side and opened the door. "Step out of the vehicle," he said, pointing at Darius. "Is there a reason?" "Now," he barked, one hand again hovering over his gun. Judge Rowe's voice sharpened. "Officer, he has complied with everything. He has no record. I suggest you call your supervisor immediately." The cop ignored her. As Darius stepped out, the officer grabbed his wrist and twisted his arm behind his back. "You fit the description of a suspect we're looking for," he said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Darius' heart raced. "This is a mistake." "Quiet." The metal snapped around his wrists. People from nearby homes began peeking out. A few cars slowed down. Judge Rowe stepped out, phone in hand, already dialing. "You are making a serious mistake, officer. Not only is Mr. Cole innocent, but I also happen to sit on the federal circuit, and I am recording everything." The officer hesitated, but only for a moment. "Record all you want. I'm doing my job." But inside, something flickered. He hadn't expected her to be someone powerful, or for her calm confidence to chip away at the authority he was trying so hard to assert. A minute later, backup arrived, and with it, so did someone else. An unmarked black SUV pulled up, and out stepped a man in uniform with silver insignia on his chest. The police chief. He walked directly toward the scene, eyes scanning the situation. "Why is this man in cuffs?" he asked the officer. The junior cop stiffened. Suspect match, sir. Suspicious vehicle. Tinted windows. The chief turned to Judge Rowe. Ma'am, are you Judge Maxine Rowe? I am. His jaw tightened. Release him. Now. The younger officer hesitated. But sir. I said now. The cop unlocked the cuffs with shaking hands. The chief didn't stop there. He stepped in front of Darius, looked him in the eye, and said, I'm so sorry, sir. This should have never happened. Then he turned to the officer and said one sentence that silenced the entire street. Give me your badge. The officer stood frozen, disbelief spreading across his face. Sir, with all due respect, but the chief didn't blink. Badge. Now. Tension crackled through the humid air. Darius stood quietly, wrists red from the cuffs, Judge Rowe at his side like an anchor of dignity. The young officer's hand trembled as he reached up, unclipped the badge from his uniform, and placed it into the chief's outstretched palm. You racially profiled an FBI agent, the chief said flatly, and you ignored a federal judge sitting in the passenger seat. Gasps came from the small crowd that had gathered. Phones were recording. Neighbors watched from porches. What had started as another example of quiet discrimination had turned into a public reckoning. The officer opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to explain, perhaps to defend himself, but the chief cut him off. I don't need an excuse. You didn't just embarrass this department. You endangered a citizen's life because of the color of his skin. If Judge Rowe hadn't been here, how far would you have gone? The officer's eyes dropped. Shame or anger? It wasn't clear which. Then the chief turned to Darius. Mr. Cole, again, I am deeply sorry. This department will be issuing an apology, and an internal investigation starts immediately. Darius nodded, still processing the moment. But it wasn't over. The chief raised his voice, looking to the cameras and bystanders. This is not what justice looks like. And if we say we stand for law and order, then that starts with accountability, especially from within. Judge Rowe gave Darius a look that said, You handled this with more grace than most ever could. He had been humiliated, cuffed in front of his own neighborhood. But now the system had finally turned on itself. The badge was gone. The damage was done. But something bigger had just begun. Darius stood on his porch that night, watching the sunset spill gold over the quiet street. The neighborhood had returned to normal, but he hadn't. What happened that day wasn't just another traffic stop. It was a mirror held up to the system. He had been cuffed, accused, humiliated, all while carrying the badge of a federal agent in his back pocket. It didn't protect him. It never really does. But something was different now. The footage had gone viral. News outlets picked up the story. The officer was suspended, pending an internal investigation. Community leaders demanded reform and retraining. And Darius? He spoke at a town hall days later, not with anger, but with purpose. It's not about one officer, he said. It's about what we allow, what we ignore, and what we change. The crowd stood and clapped, not because he was an agent, but because he had stayed calm in the face of injustice and turned humiliation into movement. Judge Rowe later shared, I've sat through thousands of cases. But that moment, watching a young black man wrongfully cuffed while wearing the nation's seal in his wallet, that moment changed me. It changed many. And while Darius knew it wouldn't be the last time someone got profiled, maybe, just maybe, it would be the last time someone got away with it. Because justice doesn't start in courtrooms. It starts in moments like this, when silence ends and truth speaks louder.